Hi, and welcome back to Tales from the Infrared. Apparently, we're having some technical difficulties, and as such,
Hi,
welcome back to Tales from the Infrared. Looks like we have a dean.
we do have a dean. Hello, everybody. We do seem to be having difficulties this afternoon. Sorry to hear that. Do we have stories to read, Jim?
Yes, we have stories, but do we have everybody is the question. Do we have a Christian?
Christian, we see you there, but you show as muted. Kat Catrice was going to join us today. She appears to be muted. Hello.
We're here. We're here.
We're all here. We're just being quiet.
Yeah, we are.
Well, this is unusual for us.
Yes, it is. So everybody joining us here today is Catrice. Thank you for coming on, Catrice. Christian is here, presumably busy at the moment, or he may have some technical issues. How are you this morning, Catrice, this afternoon?
I'm doing pretty good.
Excellent. How about you, Nephenor? What are you up to?
About 6'2".
Excellent. Glad to hear it. Rachel, how are you this morning?
As well as can be expected.
I keep saying morning. It's 1 o'clock, but it feels like morning. Jim Kilvarn, who's about to read the news. How are you, sir?
Oh, I'm doing great, but I'm not reading the news, and for me, it's still morning.
Is anybody news?
Last one in was Rachel. I think she should read the topics.
No, I think you should read it, Jim.
All right, I'll read it. The hell with it. I'll just do it. Our video game.
Wait, Dean. Before we start off, we're still forgetting one person, the most important person in this room.
Jesus?
No.
Oh.
James, how you doing, man?
Doing just great, guys. How are you? Sorry for the late folks start. That is all my fault. I was having some major issues on my end.
We will just have to dock your pay. That's all there is to it. Nah, just kidding. All right, well, I'm glad everybody's here. I'll go ahead and just read the show topics, if nobody minds. And I'm reading this cold, so prepare to be amazed and dazzled at my skills. Are video games the new great medium for telling stories? This obviously from The Escapist magazine. It's an interesting link. I haven't read it yet. Presumably somebody else has. Oliver Campbell, one of our favorite Gamergate figures, spins a tale on how video games are the next great version of storytelling. He's right. He takes us on the verbal form all the way to the current day in this interesting piece. So I haven't read it, and I'm like, I agree with him. So that should be fun. Also, Russia wants Bulgarians to stop vandalizing Soviet monuments. This isn't a joke, but still it seems a bit impossible. Russia is demanding that Bulgaria try harder to prevent vandalism of Soviet monuments after yet another monument to Soviet troops in Sofia was spray painted. The Russian embassy in Bulgaria has issued a note demanding that its former Soviet-era ally clean up the monument in Sofia Lozenets district. Sofia's Lozenets district. Lozenets probably is what it is. Lozenet, that's what I'm going to guess that is. Identify and punish those responsible and take exhaustive measures to prevent similar attacks in the future, the news agency reported Monday. This is quite fascinating indeed for somebody, especially like me. I used to study the Soviets very closely. Can't wait to talk about it. In other news, however, South Park takes on political correctness in the Caitlyn Jenner episode. And there's a link to the Telegraph that we liked, that we found worth looking at. South Park, known for its close-to-the-bone take on zeitgeist issues, that's a good way of putting it, chose to dedicate its season premiere to Caitlyn Jenner on Wednesday night. The start of the U.S. Animation's 19th series introduced a new character, PC Principal, a new headmaster for the South Park school who wants to rid the town's traditionally prejudiced and backwards ways, calling the only student of color token and using the word retarded. Jenner, the former Olympic decathlete Bruce Jenner, who this year came out as a transgender woman, is a hot topic in the town. However, Kyle does not share the opinion that Jenner is a hero and receives 2 weeks detention as a result. I was a little mixed on my impressions of that episode, but I'm sure we'll have fun talking about it. Another neat news story we'll probably talk about, there's an AI robot that learns new words in real time, tells human creators it will keep them in a people zoo. That's right, we have another talking robots. Those are nothing new, but they're getting better all the time. Androids are being developed that have an uncanny resemblance to people. A pinnacle example is an android crafted by roboticist David Hansen that resembles the famous and deceased science fiction writer Philip K. Dick. What makes Android Dick so remarkable isn't so much his appearances, his ability to hold an intelligent conversation. And it is interesting. Go and read it. There have been experiments like this going back decades, but the experiments are getting a little more interesting all the time. Next story. Fox is already discussing plans for a Deadpool sequel. Well, nobody likes Deadpool, so who cares? Boom, boom, boom. All right, and sorry, more seriously, somehow...
Blasphemy.
Almost there. Somehow, before the movie has actually seen the light of a movie screen, Fox executives are already saying that the movie is worth a sequel. I'm sorry, that's beyond funny. But anyway, while the character of Deadpool is rather amusing, it is pretty much unheard of for a studio to be talking about sequels before at least some receipts are in. Is Fox going crazier than the character of the movie, or do they know something we don't? That will be interesting to discuss. And finally, Super Beatdown, Darth Vader versus Gandalf. We really just have to see what happens when Darth Vader fights Gandalf. I'm calling it right now. Gandalf just wins. What the fuck is wrong with you people?
Yeah, I mean...
Okay, I have to disagree right there.
Well, of course you're going to disagree, but here's a cold, hard fact. Gandalf is not a human wizard. In fact, none of the wizards in Tolkien's Middle-earth are human.
He is, in fact, an angel with all the type of power that possesses. A lot of people don't know that, but it's what he is.
Yeah, I understand that, but the problem I have with it...
They are literally descendants from of the gods of that universe.
I don't know which topic we're covering first.
Yeah. But the problem with it is Vader is probably one of the most powerful Sith ever. I mean,
could he beat a Balrog? Could he beat a Balrog?
I think he could not only beat a Balrog, he could do it with one hand.
You read too much Captain America.
Yeah, no kidding.
Kat, what's your opinion?
Well, I would point out that note that the power levels in Lord of the Rings are remarkably low. Like, not just Lord of the Rings, but all of Middle-earth. Like, even though, yeah, he fought a Balrog, it was basically with just a sword. His magic is relatively weak compared to, like, normal, like, people have done look at all of the spells and stuff that Gandalf used, and they figured him out to be a third-level D&D wizard. So he's not exactly super strong. If you look at, like, say, the movies, for example, when he was fighting Saruman, he had his staff ripped right out of his hands. Force pull, and he's kind of screwed.
Okay, that's an opinion. Now let me tell you why you're wrong. No.
Well, before you tell her why she's wrong, I've got to point out something. The whole of this superpower beatdown, they show Vader using Force Lightning. Vader does not use Force Lightning. I take huge issue with this in and of itself because they get that part of Vader's character wrong. But yes, you force pull, you take Gandalf's staff, he's done. Not to mention the lightsaber. Lightsaber cuts through anything. Wooden staff. Sorry, Gandalf.
Did I mention that the wizards of the Tolkien universe are literally descended from the gods of that universe?
Well,
his
then the
power
gods of
is
that
not
universe must
derived
have
from
been
his
fucking...
staff. His power
Yes,
does
what I'm
not
saying is
derive
that-
from his staff.
Yes, but as Kat pointed out, they seem to be fairly frickin' weak. So the gods of that universe must be really fucking weak.
No, listen, I can actually, there's two confusions here that will settle this. First off, it's important to make a distinction between Gandalf the Grey and Gandalf the White. But I'll tell you a tale that's not explained, but if you know the Silmarillion and you know the mythos, you know the real deal. First off, in Tolkien's universe, there is one god.
Elvish phone book?
First off, in Tolkien's universe, there is only one god. In fact, although you can't see it very clearly, the mythos of the book is straight up Christian, and that's not my opinion, that's Tolkien's opinion. And so when he said that Gandalf and the other wizards, basically Gandalf the White is an angel, he's not even a descendant. When he falls through and transforms and becomes Gandalf the White, it's when he remembered he's an angel and immortal. All the powers of an angel, like you would read of in the Bible. And so, if he's remembered who he really is, he wins. But if he's still Gandalf the Grey, maybe he doesn't. So there you go. But did I just blow you all away with something you didn't know?
No, I knew it.
It's interesting. It's been a while since I read the Silmarillion, and it really was tough for me to get through.
I couldn't. It reads like an Elvish phone book.
Nobody can get through the Silmarillion. Nobody. What is required is for the 5 guys. For the 1 in a million people who can get through the Silmarillion, they write the books that explain the Silmarillion to the rest of us. Because you're right, it's unreadable. It's so fucking dense.
Wow.
And it's not fun. It's boring. It's like going through Leviticus in the Bible. Like, why am I reading this?
I don't know. I actually list it more like a good portion of Genesis, like X begat X begat Y begat Z.
That stuff starts in Leviticus, which is like the 3rd book. But
I thought it was Genesis stuff. I have to go back and read again.
Either way. So actually, it's not a fair question. Does he know who he is or not? Because if he knows who he is, Darth's in trouble.
I can't argue that. But in the superpower beatdown, the one they use is Gandalf the Grey, and it's the time of Bilbo Baggins.
Yeah, he's fucked then.
He's pretty much fucked.
Bilbo Baggins.
Greatest little hobbit of them all.
Yeah, so that's if we'd known this from the beginning, it's like, which Gandalf?
Yeah.
You should have watched.
It's also interesting to note that the Balrog itself is actually descended from an angel that rebelled against the rest.
Wow.
Yeah, I actually tell people that Tolkien is straight up hardcore Christian, and you don't know it because he never made it obvious. He never made it obvious.
He used to hang out with a bunch of other different like Christian authors as well, like C.S. Lewis.
In fact, one of the reasons his friendship was strained with C.S. Lewis is because C.S. Lewis was very proud of what he had done with the Chronicles of Narnia, and he showed it to Tolkien. And Tolkien's first reaction was, "You made the Christian symbolism way too overt."
It's way too obvious, Lewis, man. Seriously.
Yeah, and Lewis was like hurt. I know that story. It's an interesting
Feel
story.
the butt hurt.
And Tolkien was much more. No, you've got to,
Tolkien
it should
would be like,
flow through the way you write things. It shouldn't just be so obvious.
And Tolkien would be like, okay, hey guys, I have another story to read you, and Lewis would be like, hey, is it more about fucking elves? Maybe not in those words, but is it more about elves? And be like, yes.
You want to tell me more about the Elvis? And you want to tell me more about the Elvis language? Fine, go ahead.
It's like, oh, you want to read me another story about a lion, which is an allegorical story?
All right, okay. All right, but this time you can't read it to me.
Elvis language.
I'm seeing this conversation. C.S. Lewis. He wanted me to read me one of his stories, and it was fine, but he did it in Elvish. It was so rude. Some guy just talking to you in his own invented language.
Well, yeah, but think about it this way: all the Star Trek geeks that talk in Klingon.
Oh, Actually, I know we're just going wherever we're going here, but I have geek friends who are totally into that as a hobby. Inventing languages, I mean.
Cool.
I have friends, in fact, when I wrote my novel 10 years ago, I had a friend who's actually a Presbyterian minister of all things. I noticed he was into linguistics, and he had invented his own language, and then when I asked him about it, he's like, he's actually invented 5 or 6 languages. I'm like, oh, will you make one for my book? And he's like, sure. So I got to have one just because I met a geek who makes languages. Isn't that weird?
Oh, that's cool.
Anyway.
Speaking of which, I'll be back in a second. I'm going to go see if I can find your book on Amazon.
Okay. Can I interject for a second?
Yeah.
There's an interesting study that was done a few years ago, and they were basically creating a language through multiple iterations. What they did was they put up like some cards of like flowers, animals, like little scientific, like science fiction-y sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. So they didn't really exist, and they just gave them like a random name, and they handed it to people, and they said, okay, these are what they're called. Try to memorize them for like 5 minutes, and then we'll take the cards away from you and we'll show you the pictures, and you tell us what you think they're supposed to be called from your memory. And when they went through it, what they did was they took what the person said that they thought it should be, and then they changed that to the name to the next person, so the next person was given that as the name on the card. And after about 10 iterations, like they had started out only being able to remember like 1 or 2 of these, by like the 10th iteration they were remembering all of them because it actually sounded like an actual language with proper like verbiage and noun and word structure, just by how the brain naturally like tries to organize it. So it's like really kind of cool how easy it was to make a new language.
Yeah, actually, I mean, I just like there's a lot of areas of nerdery I don't participate in that I appreciate. I eventually came to appreciate friends who are interested in that, because if you look at how language forms, and Tolkien was real into that, right? He's got like 3 or 4 invented languages with whole writing systems and everything in his mythos, right? In Middle-earth. He did all that. In fact, the big criticism people had of him, especially in his later years, was that he spent so much time on that shit and didn't get back to writing books that would sell. Because he had an obsession with this. But if you read about it, there's a lot of people who have a similar obsession with language that way. And yeah, that's part of why invented languages come around. Or it's not quite as crazy as it sounds when you hear somebody invented Klingon. There's a lot of interesting things about language. One of my favorite books of all time is The Language Instinct by Steven Pinker, who's a great, great thinker anyway. But he lays it out straight up. Language is an instinct. People have it. If you don't give them one, they'll make one. The only exception is if you get a child completely in isolation for the first 7, 8 years of their life, which would be incredibly hideous child abuse, but has happened. And they essentially see the result, and those really are feral humans past a certain age. They will never learn to speak and will never interact properly with humans. They just won't. There's no fix for them. But we know from that, that's the only way a child doesn't develop language, if it's in complete isolation for 7, 8 years of its life.
Well, that only makes sense. I mean, the purpose of language is to communicate an idea from one individual to another. If you never have anybody to communicate an idea to, you don't need to process your thoughts in a way so that you can transmit it from one person to another. There's no need to do so. So since the first 6 or 7 years of your life is when you develop all of your primary reasoning capacity, it's like how your brain learns to organize information. If it never learns in that period how to organize it so that it can be communicated with somebody else, it makes perfect sense that that's what would happen.
But what's more interesting is that if that never happens, and there's at least one other human to be interacted with, including like a sibling, And we've had those cases too of wild children, but there was at least 2 of them. No matter how weird they grew up in a wolf pack or whatever, those things have really happened. They're very rare, but they've happened. There's at least 2 of them. They invent a language and they speak it and they're quite fluent in it. Nobody else is, but those 2 are. Which again says something about, okay, there's something interesting. There's lots of interesting things about language when you start pulling it apart. I guess would be the only part of that. So.
Okay, you're teaching me something I didn't know. Thank you.
Excellent. And I'm sure you'll find it endlessly useful, right?
Oh, believe it or not, I probably will, and it'll most likely come up in one of my conversations in normal life somewhere.
Probably within the next week.
That's okay. Then I'll even throw in one other thing. Do you know what linguists will talk about something they call a pidgin? You've probably heard the term before, but didn't know precisely what it is. A pidgin, P-I-D-G-E-N. That is when people, adults typically, who do not speak the same languages at all, will start creating an amalgam of words, like you just described, in order to do simple things like commerce and where's the bathroom, because there's like 4 or 5 languages here and nobody's conversant in all of it. And adults will develop a pidgin, which is real shorthand terminology that's usually only useful for certain things. You know what happens to their kids if they stay there? Their kids turn it into a full-blown language.
Well, I was going to say, that sounds kind of like what happens in Southern California with...
yes. Spanglish?
Yeah, Spanglish.
Yeah. Yep, that's exactly what that is. It's a pidgin, and if it goes on long enough, those kids are going to turn it into a straight-up language, and it'll be a native language to the United States. If it goes on long enough.
Now that's fascinating, and it actually has been going on for a couple of generations.
Mm-hmm.
What are you talking about? That's cultural appropriation.
Cultural appropriation. Yeah, no, this is how languages come to be.
I know. That's like how you actually create new words and languages. Well, except for English. Like, the description for, like, English is that it chases other languages down a dark alley, beats them senseless, and rummages through their pockets for stray words.
But also, I mean, if you think about it for a second, that makes sense in Firefly, how everybody was using a combination of Chinese and English.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that was, like, as much as I love Firefly...
Bad Chinese, by the way.
Even I will admit that was actually quite lazy on Joss Whedon's part. He just took some Chinese curse words and mixed it up with English and said, well, this is the kind of language that we'll speak in this.
Well, yeah, but I mean, he did the Chinese to get it past the censors.
Yeah.
Sure. Oh, well, that's probably good. And it was a nod to something he didn't get to develop further. But I mean, how much can you develop? Try and develop a sophisticated pidgin for your TV viewers, right?
Yeah, I'm just imagining a pigeon on top of a television, just perching there.
No, this is all why some of the arguments over language and accents are so pointless. It's like, no, people in Jamaica sound like that. They don't sound like that because they're ill-educated. They speak that way because Jamaicans speak that way, right? Which is a really weird sort of English, but not really English.
Yeah, but see, the problem with it is people don't want to understand that that's how they speak. They want to say, oh, they're uneducated, therefore that's how they speak. It's a way of justifying treating people like shit.
They'll call it a Caribbean dialect, but if it's properly understood, no, it's its own language that's closely related to English.
Agreed.
So it's something you can squint and listen to and figure out. And by the way, even that's not that unusual. My ex-wife speaks Polish. Everybody in her family, including her, if they squint, can figure out what a Lithuanian or a Russian is saying. Because the Polish language is not the same, but it's so close. Like, did he just say blah, blah, blah? And the other say, yeah, I think that's what he meant, because they can hear it, right?
Yeah, but I could make the same argument with Spanish and French, because they're both Latin-based, and they're very, very similar, as is the Basque language.
Right, and this is how languages work. It's just that in English we're reluctant to admit that dialects like this really are just closely related languages. So we have this urge to correct them. Or to think we've got it down better than them.
People want to be able to understand it, and they want to feel like their way is the correct way. So, yeah.
But you know what? Here's the bottom line, because we've got to get back on topic. This is why the language geeks are interesting. They bring us interesting stuff. And when they're playing with inventing languages, they're doing something just as cool as when we invent stories or whatever. So,
well, I think that's a nice segue into the Oliver Campbell article.
oh, yeah, good idea. Who read this article? Because I didn't. All I know is as soon as I heard the premise, I agreed. Somebody brought us this link, so they must have read it.
I actually read it when I brought the link, but that was like the beginning of the week, so I've been busy and forgot part of it.
His brain forgot.
Well, I'll tell you right now, just from the premise alone, I know he's right. I knew he was right. People are going to. I'm always talking about it, and I really don't want this show to be about Fallout. But when I fell into Fallout 3, I'm like, nobody can do storytelling like this. Video games are the only way you could tell this story. There would be no other way. And I saw that in Fallout New Vegas. I've seen it in a few. I saw it in BioShock. I've seen it in a bunch of things. It's not just the gaming.
1 and 2. Not in.
Yeah. And I've seen it in other things too, and it's because its way of telling a story, they can use every tool that is in the Hollywood arsenal, just about, in terms of cinematography and sound and music, and if they really want to, acting.
And
This is one area. There's no, they can do things. A BioShock, let's just go with BioShock 1. How would you even begin thinking about making that movie? It would lose something. And yet the story is so rich and so beautiful and so awful, right? But what other medium can you do that in?
Well, you can't really, because the nature of the big reveal in BioShock is, okay, it's been out for like something like a decade at this point.
Spoiler alert, and just keep going. Yep.
Yeah, total spoilers at this point. Basically, the character that you're playing has been under control of like the main villain, and everybody else, like, they keep saying, would you kindly do this? And it's basically a key phrase in the character's mindset that they absolutely have to follow exactly what they said. Turns out that they're actually a clone of the main villain. But
and more to the point, conceptually, you have just done everything you were kindly asked to do, and then you're informed that you've been mind-controlled this whole time.
Yeah, the way they handle it, though, is they give you objectives to do. They just say, would you kindly do this? And it's like, well, you just figure it's like a figure of speech. The guy just kind of happens to be polite. And it's like, no, he's actually been basically leading you around by the nose the whole time, and it's because you, as an individual, are the one following what you have been told to do as the player. That's what makes it so strong when it turns out that, by the way, we've been just basically, like, controlling you this whole time.
Right.
Well, see, another thing why I agree with this is maybe not first-person shooters, but some of the games where it's you really only have one person. You have a couple you might interact with along the way, but say something like the original Resident Evil game. You can't tell Resident Evil in a movie the way you can in the original video game that makes it so powerful.
There was an online conversation I had with, oh crap, what's his name? Please forgive me, SJW people, but the Asian guy who came out as a Gamergator, like, not he was...
Miles Ian Chung?
Ian Miles Chung.
I don't think it's Ian. No. He didn't switch sides.
Oh, okay.
He was never big in the first place. He just worked at a game dev company and one day said, you know what, I'm coming out. And this
Johiro Dev?
Yeah, I think it's him. He was trying to capture what is it that gamers look for in games, because we're talking about what is a gamer, right? Which kind of is what the Gamergate thing got up. But philosophically, what is a gamer itself? And most people seem to agree that, okay, Candy Crush just doesn't make you a gamer. It just never will, right? So then, well, what does? Because they're playing a video game. And I think the consensus we came to is that what we really love is the immersive games that you literally fall into.
I can actually probably come up with a good definition in that case. I would state that what makes a game something that you can be a gamer for is that you have to be able to interact with the game, and your interactions have to directly influence the outcome of what happens. If you're playing something like Candy Crush, then there's no difference. Like, the only thing you're changing is your score. You're not, like, making any progression. You're not getting any farther. Like, even the really old, like, Atari and Commodore 64 games, you still, even though you were going for points, there was still a progression to be made. You were getting further than you had before. If you're playing, like, Candy Crush, there's no real progression because it's all artificially created.
Tetris.
Yeah.
Tetris, Sudoku. You can fall into, I can never say
Sudoku.
Sudoku. I can see how people immerse themselves in that, but that's a different type of immersion, right?
But I mean, even so, like you can say that, but and this is something that I've actually been struggling with, because I want games to be the next great way that we tell stories. However, I can't help but feel, and looking back at all of the games that I've played, I can't help but feel that there are no games out there that truly let your choices as the player have an impact that is objective and noticeable. The story is still quite linear, and it still progresses regardless of what you do, as long as you just don't die.
There is a reason for that, and the largest problem is that it comes down to an issue with budget and the amount of time. Like, every time you put in a choice, like A or B, if you can pick A and it gives you one set of outcomes and you pick B, it's a different set, you basically have to put in twice the development time to cover both A and B. If both of those branches off as well, then you have 4 times as many than 8 and 16.
So it becomes an exponential.
Like 2 choices. Yeah, but it can be even more exponential. If you give like 3 to 5 choices, then you're looking at exponentially more difficult.
Yeah, let me give you an example that I'm pretty convinced that Fallout New Vegas, one of the reasons it got a negative initial reaction from a lot of people was the fact that the game did end. Like, you were done when you completed that mission. In fact, there's like 3 missions toward the end. It's like once you're like 3 away from done, you're pretty much done. But in retrospect, it was the right choice, especially for the resources they had, because they had told such an epic big story that any conclusion would require them to rewrite everything to suit that conclusion just so you could keep wandering around. Because there were so many, they had scripted out something like 16, I think, end scripts for when you finished, which is cool as hell once you appreciate it, because like, I made that story, and that 10-minute, 15-minute, whatever it is, cutscene at the end is showing you your story or parts of your story that you made. That's cool. People were upset at first, but if you really invest in it, it's cool. But more to the point, to get back to what Catrice is saying, they had like 16 endings. There's no way they could let you keep wandering around, because all of them fundamentally changed the conditions of everything in the whole world. So they'd have had to write you a new so you could keep running around in it.
It's impossible. An entirely new world for every single ending, and
there's also we can look at Mass Effect. The first one actually had consequences on the second one, as did both of them having some consequences on the third one. The problem with it was all these consequences when they tried to actually create that third game wouldn't line up correctly. Same thing with, I think it was Dragon Age Inquisition. So they had to linearize it to some degree to make it manageable.
And it's probably somewhat... I learned a lot of this when I'm not here to pimp my novel. We're just talking about creative stuff, right? I mean, it's something I did 10 years ago. So one of the things when I wrote it is I realized a lot of these things that never seemed obvious to me before, just because, like, how do I get in or out of this situation? And there were many times when I'd have a scene and it's like, I can't, because there's too many outcomes. I must decide an outcome. Sorry. I can't just let that thread go, or the whole story is going to unwind. And if you go through the process of constructing a story sometime, you start to appreciate these intricacies. And it almost is like playing a movie in your head, because, like, I have to provide resolution here. I have to close off options now. You know, and sometimes we don't want to do that, but that's how the world is, right?
If you create like a sequel or something, then if you have multiple endings, you have to do something with it. There's usually a correct ending that's chosen, or sometimes they'll just say, like, there's a couple of bad ones, like in Dawn of War 2, they described that they didn't say which was the correct ending to Soulstorm, for example, but they pointed out and said that we know the Space Marines did not win. We don't know who won, but we know they didn't. If you look at something like Deus Ex, then Deus
Great
Ex
game.
2,
Great game.
well, the ending of Deus Ex had like several really massive potential changes that would have completely altered the whole landscape of the world. Deus Ex 2 basically ended up being almost fan fiction of the first game, but the way they handled it was they basically picked all of the choices, and it ended up really weird.
So, wait a minute. I bet you there's a group consensus that nobody's going to disagree with. Oliver's right. This is the new horizon for storytelling.
Of course, Oliver's right.
Of course we do. Okay, so we're just exploring why he's right.
Well, there's a very strong reason for why he's right. When you go back to older storytelling, like, say, just the written word, all you have is the outline, like, you know what happens, but you don't see it, you don't hear it, there's no tactile sensation. You go into radio, you add a sentence, you can now hear it, you can hear the inflection in their voices, you can hear sound effects, you can hear, like, the growling of a monster as it approaches, that kind of thing. You go to television and movies, you add yet another sense. Now you're able to see what's going on. The sense that you add for video games is you add the capacity of interaction and choice. The player is directly affecting what happens in the story themselves. And that...
Yeah, but there's one thing you have to admit, though, is that there's a lot of developers out there who, instead of actually giving you choice, only give you the illusion of choice.
False choices, yeah, which really, really sucks. It's like, choose A or B, they both lead to exactly the same destination. It didn't matter what you chose, it just looks like you had a choice, and that's one. And you can get away with that to a degree, but you can never let the player know that.
Yeah. It's funny because I remember when, even from the beginning, it was obvious that computer RPGs were almost couldn't be anything but a sophisticated choose-your-own-ending book, right? That's what the form amounts to. But when I look at some of the greatest creations, that's kind of what these are. Some of these look like literary masterpieces to me. Certainly I would say BioShock. Certainly I would say Fallout 3. I mean, these are masterpieces. This is true art. I haven't played through Mass Effect, but I've been convinced that Mass Effect story is probably on that level, just with the way people talk about it. Grand Theft Auto 5, the way people talk about that one. Huh?
Planescape Torment?
I haven't played that one, but I believe it.
I want to point something out.
Take some of the older Final Fantasy games, for instance. My favorite Final Fantasy of the 2D era was the Japanese Final Fantasy VI, or what we got in North America as Final Fantasy III. That was my favorite Final Fantasy game of the 2D era. But even in that game, no matter how many times you played it, you were still meeting the same characters that joined your party. You were still going to the same areas of the overworld world map. You were still talking to the same NPCs, and you were eventually going to end up fighting the exact same boss.
I want to point something out at the very end of Oliver Campbell's article. This is the second to the last paragraph. The beauty of video games is that we will be able to share and experience ideas, realities, and existences that we have not been able to create in any other environment. It might teach us an important trait that often gets overlooked: empathy. Understanding for our fellow man. We won't just say walk a mile in another man's shoes as a metaphor. It's starting to get to the point where we can make that exact thing happen.
Well, yes, well said, Oliver. I've thought it. You've put it into words very, very well. I've thought it for a few years now. It's just so obvious to me. I mean, there's this notion that we have that what we're doing, that getting into these deep games like this, we're escaping reality, and it's like, and you're doing when you read your novels, your romance novels or whatever it is, you're not doing that when you're watching your football. No, we're exploring something when we get into deep video games like this.
That's also something that's very important to note, is that it is avoiding reality or escaping reality or augmenting reality. If you go to like a role-playing game, even like a tabletop role-playing game, like you're not trying to make it hyper-realistic because, well, if it was that great, we'd just do it in reality. We wouldn't do it.
That's
as
right.
a game. Like, that's something that a lot of game developers do miss, is they try so hard to make it realistic that they fail to make it fun.
Yeah. In fact, I'm talking to some people about a creative project that might help some game devs with it. Just inventing a non-automated, but more of a psychological process of how to go about creating a character that feels real. I'm talking with a person or two about. It may just be an article, but it might be more. So, ask me about that in a week or two, if anybody's curious.
I'm asking now.
No, I'll talk to you after the show, because I'm not going to announce anything now.
Yeah, I'm curious as well.
For the next video.
Unfortunately, Dean, I will forget in a week.
That's all right.
That's why we're asking now.
Well, I'll talk to you after the show. So, why do these fucking Russians have a problem with Bulgaria anyway?
I have a better question. As a nerd show, why the fuck are we talking about this?
Actually, I was kind of curious. I mean, I'm like into it. I even have like 5 opinions at once on it. But what does it have to do? How did this get in here?
Did you see the picture?
No. Well, that would explain everything.
Yeah, the picture will explain a lot.
Oh! Why didn't you say so? Oh, that's too funny. Somebody vandalized a Soviet statue. Well, that's not even a statue. I don't remember what you call that. It's something more than a relief. But they got them painted up as there's the Joker, there's Superman, there's Santa Claus, there's looks like maybe a G.I. Joe. I don't know.
Wolverine.
There's
Captain America.
That's Wolverine. There's Wolverine. Yeah. There's
And in the background, you see the American flag.
Yeah, and Ronald McDonald. And I guess
And
Black
Santa.
Wonder Woman. Black Wonder Woman appears to live in Bulgaria. I think that's
I mean, is this vandal? Like, well, okay, yeah. If it's a monument, to soldiers, which it looks like it is, yeah. I mean, come on. As cool as this is, there is definitely something a little wrong and depraved about this.
Yeah, this is like. Well, no, come on now, because this is. I mean, street art that isn't legal is one thing, because street art that's cool is one thing, but yeah, I feel the same twinge he does. No, this is a monument to the dead. Why are you?
That is
Whether they were your enemy during the Cold War or not, they were technically your ally during World War II.
On the other hand, this isn't from the Russian perspective. It should be like this. They didn't take hammers to it.
That's true. That's
Okay,
a good thing.
No.
They just put some paint on it.
As
No,
a
but they
former
did
member of the U.S.
Americanize
military, I
Yeah.
want to point something out.
Okay.
And as a geek, I'm looking at this and I'm like, oh my god, this is fucking phenomenal. As a member of the U.S. military, I can completely see the Russian side. This is wrong. You are degrading a monument to fallen soldiers.
Yeah.
So I'm really torn on this.
Yeah.
Because, yes, it is wrong to degrade this monument. But at the same time, the way they did it is just so phenomenal. I'm just like...
I mean, you can wash that off too. That's the thing. You can probably wash it off. I can't imagine.
And as I like to say, in this case, we're hating the sinner, not the sin.
Yay! There you go. There you go. Because it is fucking yeah. And it is, from a Russian perspective, they're not the Soviet Union anymore, but they still think of themselves as part of that heritage, right? So
Yeah, they're getting lost in the past.
Well, it's part
maybe,
of
but
the
no, I'm not agreeing. I'm like, they're taking a responsibility seriously. There's theoretically no USSR anymore, yet somebody's going to take the responsibility for caring about shit like this.
Oh, that's true.
And I'll give them that. So, I don't know.
Well, I'll give the Ruskies one thing. They were fucking beasts in the Battle of Stalingrad.
In fact, I'll give it to you, and I know Jim will
They
agree
were
with me on this.
beasts.
They were. And Jim will agree with me on this one. Good for them for looking out for those monuments. They don't have to. It's not their country anymore.
I agree. Yeah, it's good for them on looking out for them.
I was actually thinking the Russians were overreacting. I'm like, no. Even if nothing really happens, the point has been made. That's how I see it anyway.
But still, come on, look at that picture. You can't tell me that that's not still.
Well,
kinda
how did they
cool.
make that one guy Santa Claus?
Everybody quiet, because Kat's been trying to say something for the last 5 minutes.
All right, Sarah, go ahead, Kat.
I'm sorry for being so quiet. But no, I do want to say one thing is that the biggest issue I think that the Russians probably have with it is, to a degree, yes, they're upset that it's an insult to the dead soldiers, but more than that, it's that they basically Americanized the Russian statue, and that's basically what happened to their whole country. The whole thing got Americanized, and that's kind of insulting in a way when you think about it.
I did not even think of that aspect. That's probably exactly what that feels like.
And when Vladimir Putin is quite literally, or probably, the only world leader who will publicly stand up and say, we will not accept your political correctness.
Mm-hmm.
He is the only world leader who will publicly say that. Keep it out of Russia.
I have very little respect for that man. I really don't. Well, respect. I don't think much of him as a human being. Put it to you that
Folks,
way.
we are getting some kind of echo here.
Oh, we are, aren't we?
Testing.
Somebody's causing an echo. Somebody's got an open mic.
Yeah, if you're not speaking, please close your mic.
All right. My thoughts on this, as far as Putin, I have respect for him saying, screw the politically correct bullshit. That's the only that's the only amount of respect I have for him.
Well, and he's managed to keep Russia together. But yeah. But anyway, I guess I'll just mark this off as I just don't know entirely how. Because part of me is going, I get it. It's a thumb in the eye too, but it's just an isn't it? I guess I'm just going to have to come out from my perspective like, no, I was ready to make fun of the Russians on this one, but no. Somebody's got to object. I'm glad they did. That's how
I agree with the objection, but still that geek part of me is looking at it, and it's like, that is so awesome.
Well, okay, so should somebody be principal PC to go police that?
Well, I mean, yeah. I feel the exact same way. On one hand, I have to object to it because this is a monument to the dead, monument to soldiers who gave their lives to fight off their enemy. Whether this, I can't tell if this is a monument to the soldiers of the Cold War or if it's a monument to the soldiers of World War II that fought against the Nazis. Can't really tell.
In any case, since I'm segueing hard now, political correctness and the PC police and Principal PC in South Park. I had a mixed reaction to this episode, and I think you did too as well, Christian.
Yeah, I mean, mixed feelings. I mean, the episode started out strong. The first half was actually kind of funny. The second half, I don't know, man. I mean, the way they ended that episode with Kyle saying that line that he did, in the way that he did, I can't tell if Matt and Trey are kowtowing and just surrendering and saying we give up, or if there's actually a reason to keep PC Principal around as a permanent character. I don't know. I really, really hope he's not just going to be the character that, every once in a while or every time
No, I hope he's really the principal.
Get to some shenanigans. He woo, 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 and he has to interrupt and stop them and then scream in their face about how they're not being PC. I really fucking hope that's not the case. I really hope they intend to do something really fucking funny with him.
I do too, because I got the same kind of mixed reaction toward the end. It's like, did they just pull their punches? Did I just see them do that?
Yeah.
That's kind of how it felt. What do you? Rachel, go ahead.
I really think that they were trying to make a statement. I think it was very important that they had to sort of phone. Anyway, that they had to surrender at the end somewhat to the PC Principal for the thing to sort of sink in,
Well, also, look at the one thing that Cartman said at the very end. What, Kyle? You have your cake, don't you want to eat it too?
Yeah.
That was a definite point of saying, hey, you know what? You're not as good. It's not as good as you think it is it?
And think about Kyle, though. He's always been the voice of reason, and in this particular situation, he's the one who's coming under fire here. If you've noticed that, every time it's like, oh, I've learned something today.
And he did not. That's it. That's probably part of it too. That's supposed to be the pattern. Even if what he learned is stupid or whatever, right? This was like just surrender. It was total surrender.
It was total surrender to the bullshit that was going on because he'd been bullied into silence. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that is actually the point of the episode, is that PC will do nothing more than bully you into silence.
Okay,
but also
yes, and you're
remember
right,
that PC Principal and his politically correct fraternity is going to be around for a while.
I hope you're correct, because like I said, that wasn't Kyle. And that wasn't a South Park ending. There's supposed to be some punch in the gut, and that felt like not a funny punch to the gut. So, yeah.
Well, I mean, they might be planning. They still might be planning something, because with last season, the 18th season, they introduced continuity for the first time, and every single episode had some sort of continuity with a previous episode. I mean, there's always episode 2, and we could be pleasantly surprised next week.
Note as well that there may be a different level of control by the producers as well. Like in a lot of TV shows, I know this isn't very common for South Park, considering the nature of it and what they've been able to get away with, but a lot of the times a producer will come in and say, I want to have this character in here, you are going to put it in, or your show is not going to be running anymore. Now, they're big enough that they haven't really had to deal with that much in the past. But if we actually had to go and look at, like, who's actually running the show behind the scenes other than them, there may have actually been a change between the seasons that we don't know about.
Absolutely possible. If everybody, Kat's suggesting that there could have been a change behind the scenes, and maybe we're just being paranoid because we're all like shell shocked from the last couple of years. But there's a real possibility that executives would, because the corporate executive class is a different class of people from the rest of us, and they just move from corporation to corporation. They pretty much, most of them get auto promoted there out of the right schools, and they just, that's what they wind up being as corporate executives. And we saw what happened at Reddit.
Yeah, but I mean, let's not forget this Matt Stone and Trey Parker we're talking about. I mean,
Who would have to?
They own South Park. They have final say on everything. And in the past, it's not like they've never had to face a network executive that told them they can't do something. But their MO is to give a response such as, "Oh, okay, well, you don't want us to draw Muhammad? Well, guess what we're gonna fucking do?
Censor him at the last minute."
Keep in mind as well.
But they still did it.
Yeah, actually, I think this is them being really subversive if you think about it. Think about what's been going on with Comedy Central. A lot of you Canadians might not know about it as much. What's been going on with Comedy Central is that as time goes on, as time progresses, we've been seeing all of the shows on Comedy Central. There used to be so many different edgy and, you know, things that pushed the boundaries of what was socially acceptable on Comedy Central, but then slowly but surely, everything's been becoming safer and more social justice-y, less offensive overall. And I think that that's what's going on. I think that probably what's been happening is they've been getting pressure from the stuff that they've been putting up. Because they are the final remaining edgy show on... Edgy is probably not a good word. That's what people use to describe things when it's
truly
just...
edgy? You mean truly edgy, like edgy used to be?
Yeah. Truly, you know, they push...
Boundary pushing. Yeah. Boundary pushing.
Yeah. They're the only show that remains that is that cannot easily be controlled, that is subversive.
And I know for a fact, because I saw that wonderful documentary, which everybody should see, by the way. It's called 6 Days to Air.
It's an awesome documentary.
Well, we already know they have an assigned person whose job is to tell them what they can or can't do and do network executive negotiations as to what they'll be allowed to do, and they've even ruminated on how they manipulate that. But in the final analysis...
That never actually comes across in the show, though, because their MO has always been like, oh, you don't want us to say shit anymore? Well, guess what? We're going to have an entire episode where not only are we going to say shit as many times as we can, we're going to have a counter at the bottom corner of the screen counting how many times we say shit.
Christian, they fought for it and got permission, or it would never have aired.
Well,
is the thing. They had to get permission in the end. They had to. Or it would never have aired.
As well, though, they might be changing like their MO a little bit. Like if you look at, say, for example, go back to Babylon 5. At one point, like they were basically given free realm to do whatever they wanted. Like J. Michael Straczynski could basically do whatever he felt like without any questions, except they demanded a hotshot style character for one season, and he was forced to create this character that he absolutely hated the archetype of. Mm-hmm. And to deal with that, at the very end of the season, he had him die in a rather graphic manner. Like, he melted on screen because that's what he wanted to do to get rid of him. So they might go with a similar pattern, I'm not sure.
Yeah, but well, and we're seeing, we may be reading way too much in. It may have just been a weak episode. They have those. And it may be nothing's going on, but I do think something's going on. I really do. And it wouldn't surprise me if we find out that this is wild speculation I'm pulling out of my ass. It wouldn't surprise me if we found out that season 20 is internet only. Because I can see that that's happening too, right? these corporate executives are wanting more and more and more and more control as the audience for their product dwindles and dwindles and dwindles and dwindles. There's only one outcome to that. Matt and Trey just say, "Fuck you, I gotta go," but they're gonna have contractual obligations.
Do you think maybe South Park might actually move to something like maybe Netflix or Hulu?
Why not? Because they would have more control, and that's what those two want more than anything else. You can see it in their work. You give us control.
Yeah, creative control.
And that's why the Trailer Park Boys did it. They broke off from Showtime.
But they're still going to get into situations of like let's say they want out of their contract right now. It's a virtually given that it would cost them millions of dollars to do that. Maybe more than they have. Right? They've almost certainly contracted with Comedy Central to produce this many episodes at this budget, and you're going to produce them. So what, Rachel?
No, but I think I don't know if it would actually be good for them to go to the internet just yet, but I think it's inevitable, to be honest. I mean, what's been going on with all of the corporate execs at the top are probably putting pressure on them, saying like, "Oh, all of this stuff you're doing right now, it's offending all the snowflakes. You simply can't do it anymore." Maybe back in the 90s. Like you were all that great.
That a generation of the kids in their 20s are acting this way now? Oh my God.
Well, see, the thing that I think people seem to be missing is for men it's more of a desire to be free, to do what they want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And these snowflakes are basically saying, no, we don't like it, you can't do this.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, it's not even a matter of, well, I don't like it, I'm not going to watch it. It's, I don't like it, nobody should be allowed to watch it.
Yes, and it certainly should not be staining our part of the world. Yeah.
I mean, it's the equivalent of somebody walking into an art gallery and because they don't like a certain painting and they find it offensive, they throw a towel over it.
Yeah, exactly. It'll all shake out. Matt and Trey are never gonna. They can't. If they sell out, they cease to produce. Right? That's
just it.
Yeah. If they sell out, they can't do it anymore anyway.
I mean, right now, practically everybody in comedy is looking at Matt Stone and Trey Parker because they essentially started the whole everything is funny or nothing is funny.
Well, I mean, that goes back to Lenny Bruce, but yeah, they were the ones who brought that to television. Listen, they will offend anybody. In fact, when I watch some of the Atheist Wars, I always think, oh, my science.
Well, there's also, I can bring up another one from, I don't know when Lenny Bruce is, but my personal favorite is Mel Brooks.
Yeah, Lenny Bruce was a 1950s, early 1960s comedian who just he got arrested. He got arrested.
The Carnegie Hall times.
No, later than that. Late 50s, early 60s. Okay, it may have been in Carnegie Hall and amongst other places. But yeah, he swore a lot, very transgressively. He used a lot of ethnic humor, and it was ethnic humor aimed at everybody.
Yeah, well, if you look at Blazing Saddles in the 70s,
that was in part inspired by Lenny Bruce.
Yeah.
And guys like Mel Brooks brought it into Hollywood. They had to kind of edge it in slowly. And Matt and Trey were the ones who brought that mentality to television, which I appreciate. That we're going to be transgressive, and when you tell us we can't, that's when we're going to do it. They don't always get their way, though. Let's not mistake it. They don't always get their way. They lose some fights, and they'll admit that too. And I'm getting the feeling they're just getting more fights right now than they're used to.
Yeah, I would have to agree with that, but that's kind of the point, is that these special snowflakes are saying you can't do it, it doesn't belong in this world. The problem with it is at some point what you do is you stop things from being created. Like, you know how Hollywood keeps rebooting everything. When are they going to reboot Blazing Saddles? When are they going to try and do that again?
I don't think that. Oh my God! What would happen? What would happen if someone tried?
They can't. It's impossible.
And what's so great about that particular movie is it's transgressive all over racial issues, but in a way that made its audience come away feeling like it's dumb to be racist. And like, I don't even think the modern social justice could understand that. All they'd hear is racial epithets and jokes.
Yes.
I mean, I kind of feel the exact same way about the film American History X. I came away from that film thinking these skinhead types are fucking stupid.
Well, I would think that you missed the central message of that film then, because
well, I mean, I get that the film wasn't
so much as
like,
they are pathetic.
Yeah,
Like,
I know
no
the
power.
film wasn't trying to glorify racism. It was actually trying to paint it in the light that it's a real issue, but racism is still wrong. Like even Edward Furlong, his ending line is that life is too short to be hating all the time.
On my other radio show, Black on White Red Pill Radio, which I do periodically with Obsidian, Mamiya Obsidian Ali, we talk very frankly about things like that, and I know he'd be agreeing with me that by being completely transgressive all over race issues, it actually desensitized people and immunized them and made them more comfortable being around each other. That's at least if you were an older movie buff, that's what Blazing Saddles did for you. It was like by making the black jokes and the white jokes and the Asian jokes and all that. There, it's out. Now we can just talk.
Blazing Saddles.
That's right. That's the effect that movie was supposed to have. And these people have turned it upside down and turned it into something creepy. Like, by being anti-racist, they're more racist than possible to imagine. It's hair-raising, isn't it? Does anybody know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, totally do. I mean, like, the way Blazing Saddles did, as you mentioned, was it basically made fun of everybody equally. So it got to the point that it was like, well, we're basically all in the same pot. We're just making fun of each other arbitrarily.
Everybody in this goddamn movie is an idiot. How can you even, I'm sorry, go ahead, Trace.
No, you were basically making the point. Everybody is equally stupid, and if we're making fun of each other, then it's like we're basically just trying to cover for our own kind of dumbness in a way.
Yeah, and when you look at a movie like American History X, which I often recommend to people, that's exactly, if you've understood that film, what you've understood is that their race hate comes from a place of pain that's misplaced. I've met skinheads, okay? I've known them, and I mean hung out with them because they were just in the neighborhood when I was growing up, right? One of these special snowflakes would not even know how to react to that, but no, if there's skinheads in your neighborhood when you're a kid growing up, you're going to meet them, and you're not going to instinctively know you're supposed to go to war with them.
You notice something else as well about them, is that...
They're poor.
No.
They're poor.
Well, there is that,
most of them are.
Specifically, that they feel they're the victims. It's always the victim is the one who doesn't feel bad about oppressing against somebody else. It's like, well, they're stealing our jobs. We're being victimized. It's okay for us to hate the black people. Or they have all of our money. We're starving in the streets. It's okay for the German people to hate the Jews. Every time it's always, we are the victim. It's okay because we're the victim class. And if you're the victim class, you can do no wrong to your oppressor. And that's one thing that they haven't understood, is that they're playing the exact same thing that has been being used for thousands of years, since recorded history begun. Like, go back, look at, like, every major work of fiction, or like the Bible, or any other like historical records, and it's always the same thing. They're hurting us, so it's okay if we hurt them.
Well, that's kind of an interesting perspective. I like it.
I share it.
Yeah, but the thing that amazes me is you say the Bible, they're hurting us, it's okay to hurt them. Jesus himself was sitting there preaching, turn the other cheek.
That has a much different context than...
Yeah, it does. It does. There's war all over the Bible.
Yeah.
We could be arguing Bible stuff all day, I guess, but
Yeah.
no,
I could bring up the story of Moses. I mean, because the Jewish people were being oppressed by the Egyptians and Pharaoh, it was somehow all right for Moses when he split the Red Sea to bring it back again when Pharaoh and his men were still in there and drown them all.
Even worse than that would be killing all of the firstborn children. It's like, it's not the children's fault.
Dude, Moses led a genocide of a people called the Amalekites. It's also in the Bible. They don't like putting that in the movies because... And in fact, he ordered all the men and boy children put to the sword, and the women would... all the women who had not yet had children were kept. Everybody else was...
Well, yeah, they had very
gave those
specific
orders.
laws on those.
But this just points out the pattern.
We really shouldn't be getting into like Bible.
Yeah,
we're
just
using it as history.
South Park
We're using it as let me finish. We're using it as history as an example of what Catrice just said, which is that always the conflict begins when you have one class of people who feels they are oppressed by another, whether right or wrong. If you make them feel they're oppressed that way, some kind of horrible result usually occurs. And we become, it's real.
And it's happening again with social justice warriors.
That's the point, and that was how I was trying to get us back.
Well, actually, I was going to segue into something. People are wondering, oh my gosh, are Matson and Trey Parker finally becoming PC? Are they finally going to give in to these people? I don't think so. I mean, think about what the whole movie Bigger, Longer, and Uncut was about. I mean, I remember as a child, I just thought it was, people, it was just this whole big mess, and I didn't really understand it. But like looking back at it now, that entire thing was against political correctness. The whole think of the children mentality. We have to do, and they felt justified.
And do you remember when that movie came out? What year that was?
No, I don't remember. It was like
99.
90-something.
99. So that's almost
99.
a 20-year-old film. It's almost a 20-year-old film.
Exactly. It's almost a 20-year-old film. And back then, what ended up happening was, everybody was like, "Oh my God, South Park is the worst thing for our children." And yet, if you noticed in the movie, what was happening is that, as a result of everybody getting involved in trying to fight the evil Canadian cause, what ended up happening as a result of that was all of the children were being neglected enough so that they could actually form like their own resistance and all this other stuff. Nobody was watching any of the kids. They were actually being shitty parents instead of taking responsibility. In fact, that's a common theme in South Park. Instead of taking responsibility for where they failed, they want to then blame other people or something else. They need a scapegoat to blame so that they feel better about their own decisions. They won't own any of it. They just want to blame something else.
That's the thing. Once you have, like, I feel oppressed, somebody else is harming me, and anything that is bad that ever happens to me must be because of the scapegoat, I don't have to take responsibility for my own issues, even if the scapegoat actually did cause them. Is almost irrelevant, or at least in reality it should be, because it's like, well, it's still your responsibility to take care of your own life. I mean, yes, it sucks if somebody else is harming you in the process, but you have to be able to do something on your own as well. You can't just sit down and cry about it and hope that somebody else harms them so that they stop harming you. You have to take some of your own responsibility as well.
I think that's the trick between despotism and what we might call honorable combat. I mean, when we're talking about this, whether it's a lot of people came in through Gamergate, some of us were actually here on this fight a year or 3 earlier. This social justice thing is growing. It is growing, especially in corporate America now and in governance. So once you see it, one of the things that you wind up constantly questioning in yourself is, am I becoming them? And that's always a valid question. The question is pretty much always in play, unless, you're immediately distracting from an important issue at hand. Otherwise, the question of, are we becoming them, is always in play. Because it's the minute if you don't allow that question, you're going to become them.
Well, if you don't question your own motives, you don't question yourself, you're going to eventually become somebody who thinks, I'm right 100% of the time. There's nothing wrong with a little bit of healthy questioning yourself. I've done it most of my life. I'm pretty sure most of the people on this panel have done it to some degree.
Well, I think we should always be questioning everything, especially the things that we assume to be true, the things that we think are absolutely true, that we have not questioned because they're so blatantly obviously true, are the things we have to look at the most closely and put the most scrutiny to, because it usually turns out that they're not true at all, or they're only partially true.
Yep, exactly. That's why avoiding dogma is important. But the thing is that when you're dogmatic like these people are, there's a tremendous power in it, right? Especially because when you're confronted with dogmatists who are hitting you with arguments that are very hard to refute, not to initially just cave in or find the point of not reconciliation, but compromise, right? That's what everybody does the first time they meet a really narrow-minded dogmatist, because that's the instinct most sane people have. And so the dogmatist can get away with quite a bit for quite a while because they're just unwavering. And the only possible response to them is to be unwavering back. It's the only way to fight them. You have to be unwavering back. Otherwise, they just keep going. And most normal people can't even see it sometimes until it's too late.
Well, that's the rational mind. We try to think and learn and question ourselves and say, well, are they right? And as soon as you stop to say, well, maybe you have a point, then they jump all over it. And it's like, because
what do you mean, maybe I have a point?
Yeah, it's like they're not going to give the same response that you give them. Like, you're considering their points. They're not considering yours at all. Like, there's no thought that's put into whether they're even wrong. They haven't even considered the possibility.
They may even make a gesture to make you think they're conceding something to you that when you analyze it is no concession at all. They'll say something, like, to give a good example, I spotted Lacey Green doing that in one of her latest videos. What she said, which sounded like an initial concession, was that both feminists and non-feminists think this. And that's like, wow, that sounded like, oh. But then the way she framed everything else, it was like there was nothing nice about the non-feminist position by the time she was done, right? She just reduced it to a complete caricature of stupid, while initially it sounded like, oh, she's conceding this other view exists.
Yeah, but we know that Lacey Green sits there and puts facts together with lies and creates her own story.
Her own strange reality. But no, because I'm telling you, I'm describing the mentality to you.
Yeah.
You can't compromise with Lacey Green. It can't be done. You might as well try compromising with Jell-O. You can't.
I just eat Jell-O.
Huh?
I just eat Jell-O.
Ew, I did not need that image.
No,
I'm not always room for Jell-O.
Oh, God. Somehow between us, that horrible image came into my head. Okay.
Hey, what you're thinking may not be what I'm saying, so.
That's right. That's right.
Pretty sure
We might need to discuss this and maybe come up with our own language to.
Well, you know, maybe we should design an AI robot that speaks like Lacey Green. In fact,
nice segue.
Maybe if we look at the AI robot over here, it might be more intelligent and sentient than Lacey Green is. Anybody else read this story? Because I did.
Oh no, keep us in.
I mean, I've heard about this, and I have actually been reading about this, and personally, I'm skeptical because in the past we have been told about advances in AI and robots that have AI, artificial intelligence.
All right,
and it just turned out that they were programmed to respond in a certain way, and they were still completely constrained by their programming.
Yeah, but look, and this is different from Lacey Green Howe. Sorry,
Well, see,
no, I'm not kidding. I'm kidding.
Here's one of my all-time biggest arguments with any time anybody tells me artificial intelligence, and it's very much this. What we call artificial intelligence is nothing more than a virtual intelligence because it's following its programming. It cannot actually think for itself. It's not actually intelligent, it's just following a program.
I'll tell you.
Well, technically, so are we.
Like, yeah, it's like, for example, if we break down, like, a basic response, like, say, you do something nice to me, because you did something nice to me, I feel better, and I'm thankful that you did something nice to me. That's basically programming. Like, it's not completely random. The only thing is we have very advanced programming, basically, because we can take other things into account, like, I'm in a crappy mood today, so I'm going to make correlations that are more negative connotations. So when you try to be nice to me, I'm going to be snippy back. But that's still basically programming.
I even have I've been going through some medical treatments this last year that have made me rethink how the human mind works, but God knows that'd be a whole show in and of itself. But philosophically, why do you think you're not programmed? I mean, really, who told you that? Did you think you needed a God? Because you don't. We can have that argument another time. You certainly don't need a God for you to be pre-programmed, sir. And we know you have programming. In fact, in almost any conversation we ever have, you guys are all about hearing how evolutionary psychology drives men to act this way and women to act that way. Sorry, you have programming, son. So,
I don't think that it's completely hardwired entirely. Like, if we say evolutionary biology, that would basically be like, almost like your BIOS. But it's not like the actual programs that are running, but you need the BIOS to run those programs, and those programs are
firmware, not hardware.
Yeah, firmware, not hardware. Yeah, that works.
well, and so what you're saying is what? You're just an emergent effect of all that, right? But when we say it can't think, define thinking. And actually, we had this discussion before, but really, Alan Turing gets brought up a lot. And he's brought up more and more these days for a reason, but he was one of the biggest computer scientists of the mid-20th century. Dr. Randamarkam frequently refers to Mr. Turing's machine, and he means the computer, and he's referring to Alan Turing. And Alan Turing he cut the Gordian knot. And I'll have people argue with me, but in the final analysis, nobody can beat it. He cut the Gordian knot. What is artificial intelligence? If you can't tell the difference, you must have it. And as we get closer and closer to being unable to tell the difference, we are getting closer to that. That is better than anything I ever saw before. And I've seen this before. I'm not saying that it's human or that it's sentient. But
okay, what I'm going to point out, Dean, is we have artificial intelligence in human beings. Because a lot of people I've sat there and tried to talk to, I've listened to what they have to say, and they do a great job of pretending to be intelligent, but they're not that intelligent.
Yeah.
Lacey, we're looking at you.
That's true.
I'd be looking at a lot more people than just that. Like, also, like, all the people that try to pose as being faux intellectuals. Like, for example, like, you get, like, every single time you have, like, a forum, somebody's gonna be, like, a grammar Nazi, or poke at, like, people's spelling as though it especially matters. It's like, as long as you get the message of what they're trying to say, that's all that really matters. Like, I've known, like, actually quite a few of some of the smartest people I've ever run into are exceedingly dyslexic and trying to read what they have to say. Like, the spelling is atrocious, but the ideas behind it are brilliant.
Well, I will concede to the grammar Nazis and the speller Nazis. As annoying as they are, they do serve a good purpose, because I've seen where the logical endpoint that you're talking about goes, and I've met guys who can only express their complex ideas in like math, and I'm like, dude, I don't do that. We're done with each other. Somebody's got to bring us all to some level of similar level of
there does have to be
communication.
some level of communication, but as long as you can have the capacity for,
Right.
your ideas to transmit from one person to another, then language has served its purpose. It doesn't really matter beyond that point if you spell it like ugly UGLY or ugly with UGHLY, because it makes you get that extra ugh in there.
There's something worth Googling to get to the subject of what is artificial intelligence, which actually leads to the question of what is intelligence. And, what AI researchers really do believe is there's multiple types of intelligence. And they will argue, for example, that a mousetrap is, in fact, an intelligent device. Unless it's just like glue, right? But I mean a regular old snappy mousetrap, that it is a form of intelligence, a very primitive one. And they kind of go from there on a lot of different things. And what is emotional intelligence? What is this kind of intelligence? That kind of intelligence? But Douglas Hofstadter has a phrase that's worth Googling. You might have to put it in quotes, you might not, but it's called "I am a strange loop." And I am a strange loop. And to put it into a real simplistic analysis, if a loop in programming is something that it's an algorithm that'll just keep going, and it will never stop, right?
Unless broken, yes.
Unless something breaks, it just keeps the loop goes and goes and goes and goes and goes. And if the loop becomes self-referential, it can be said to have a certain kind of awareness. And he was arguing this more than 20 years ago. That's kind of what human sentience looks like. And I mean, you can get into some really weird philosophical territory here once you start analyzing yourself. How do you know what thinking is?
I've never been able to prove that I can think. It's like,
All
I
right.
think, therefore I am thing, and it's like,
Okay.
I can't actually prove I think, so do I?
I can't prove that most feminists think, so...
I can't prove... Oh, I was saying, Lacey Green and this AI program, I don't know which one's really more sentient. It's clear to me. Me. Lacey, God.
Technically, I think he's sapient more than sentient, but yes.
Yeah, I know. That was my joke. But no, I actually think this AI research is important. What's his name? Ray Kurzweil goes into this in the book, The Singularity is Near, which more people ought to read. Even they don't have to agree with the conclusions to note many of the thought-provoking insights he's got. And I can attest that he's 100% true. He just makes a list going back to the 60s of what people said a computer would never be able to do. And the list just keeps getting longer and longer and longer of things computers are doing every day now that used to be people said they would never do them.
On the other hand, consider Hans Moravec's paradox, that there are certain things that we thought they would be doing like 60 years ago, and we still aren't even close to. Like, for those that aren't aware of it, I'll go through like the paradox really quickly. The concept of the Moravec paradox is that things that we believe to be really complex are often not that complex at all. Things that we think are very simple are exceedingly complex. Like walking across the room, we thought we'd be able to get robots to do that like 30, 40 years ago. It turns out it's really bloody difficult to do. But it seems easy to us because so much of our brain is devoted and specialized towards spatial awareness, checking our balance, checking our surroundings, all controlling all the muscular groups, everything like that.
Which is mostly not controlled by your conscious mind, by the way. Most of it is not.
Exactly.
Pretty much automated.
Those are the parts that have been built the longest. If you follow like the evolutionary biology, then the oldest parts of the brain are the ones that are the most adept and advanced at doing what they do. So things like balance, it's the farthest reaches of the brain. It's what's been worked on for the longest period of time because it needed to be. For things like our capacity to do logical thinking, to be able to count past 4 and such, we've needed that for like, what, 7,000 years?
Probably tops, maybe 10.
So we think that, like, algebra is really complex. You can teach your calculator to do that.
Yes, I know.
It's not complex at all, but it seems absurdly difficult. But that's
because
only
our brains don't know how to do it.
Yeah.
Yes.
But it's actually a very easy task. So if you start looking at like artificial intelligence, like we think that, oh, they're going to get like so intelligent, like so fast because computers are so smart. It's like, no, computers are stupid as hell. They're really fast at being stupid. Like
so
they can.
Neurons.
Yeah, it's.
Well, can we just say that could I say, and would you agree that intelligence is the capacity to learn and add to your own programming, whatever that means in the context of it being a sentient living being
That
or a
I would agree with.
Yeah.
So to add to your own programming. So this AI robot, this Philip Dick, if this robot can actually add to its own programming stuff that was not put there by its programmer, I will say that's an AI.
The question is, how much do you define as put there by its programming? Like, if we say, okay, I have a friend that worked for NASA for a bit. He was working, like, when he was in college, he was doing an AI thing for robotic manipulation, where, like, a robotic arm, instead of programming how to actually perform picking up an object, moving it over to a bin and putting it down and such, he set up a series of cameras on it and gave it very basic instructions of how to figure out whether it had performed the action correctly or not. So when it tried to pick up the object and it failed, it would make note of how it failed by being off by this degree, so it would move into position the next time and pick it up properly. Is that artificial intelligence? Because it was programmed specifically to do that.
So was a baby.
Yeah, it was basically like
So
the
was a
very
baby.
infancy of intelligence in that way.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, Catrice was making the point that, you know, there's a long list of things people thought would have happened by now but didn't. I'll mention Kurzweil's book again because he mentions that in The Singularity is Near. It's like, well, that's because prognostication is hard, and you see that. He boasts a personal 50% correct rate on his projections, at least up to the point where he had, you know, written that particular book. Because it is a common problem. We assume something's going to be easier than it is, and then there's also we assume something's hard that isn't. Yeah, if you think about what it takes to walk, just to walk, there's millions probably of complex split decisions being made.
Well, the biggest problem with walking is that walking is controlled falling, and that's why computers have such a hard time figuring it out.
But by the way, they have units that are walking just fine now. I mean,
yeah,
Well, I mean, somebody actually asked the question, you know, how do you define what is pre-programmed? I mean, what if this AI robot is able to use facial recognition, because we know it does have facial recognition properties.
which, by the way, is an AI problem. Recognition is an AI issue.
What if it has facial recognition and it doesn't know your name? Its programmer didn't program it to know your name, didn't program it to recognize your face, but it uses facial recognition to create let's say a database entry with your facial recognition, whatever it takes from that, and then you tell it your name. You say, my name is Dean, or my name is Christian, and it remembers that. So if you come back to it in a week or a month or a year, it searches through its database. That's information that it added to its own programming.
Well, I still would not call that AI.
I think AI. Hold on. James doesn't speak much, so let's give him the floor.
I defer to James.
I think AI, true AI, needs to be able to display preference.
Ooh.
Actually, I agree. I actually agree.
That's interesting.
Because that's really what humans do. That's really what beings that make decisions do. They have preferences based on the decisions that they've made. They decide that one thing is better than another because for whatever reason. Also, even further, that preference doesn't necessarily have to be based on efficiency.
I would argue against the point, actually, because preference can be very simply put in discrete numerical values. You can say that A is worth 12 points, B is worth 10 points, therefore I desire A. That is still not very intelligent.
Well, I tell you what.
That's why I said it doesn't have to be based on efficiency.
You could also say I prefer B because it's 10 is just a nice rounded off number.
Right. I want to ask you a question.
Experiment with this.
I have a thought experiment for you.
Let's say you created an AI. It has the ability to interpret taste. You provide it 2 different flavors. Now, it can run the math all day long on 2 different flavors. But when it states a preference for one or the other, then you really need to consider whether this is AI.
Well, the thing about preference is, especially with something like taste, we don't know where preferences for taste entirely come from. There could be a biological, mechanical component that says, we prefer this taste because this taste doesn't suit well with our system, or it could be a learned one. And that's just it. That in itself is programmed in us in its own way, either by hardware or software. And so what difference would it be for a computer? It's just how the hardware and software analyzes.
And there's no real telling whether or not that AI would be even capable of distinguishing taste outside of, a simple chemical analysis.
Well, there's already that issue to begin with in nature. Like, if you look at something like felines, if they have about 20% of their diet or more as carbohydrates, they'll develop like feline diabetes. And in that case, felines do not have the capacity to taste sugar. The gene required for it is completely lacking. They cannot taste it. If you give them like a bowl of sugar water and a bowl of water, they will not have a preference.
Right. And
there are exceptions.
I want to give a proposal. Or I want to ask James, let's say I have a security robot, and this security robot literally is lethal weaponry. It's carrying a hot gun, a major bruiser of a machine gun, actually, and a camera. And there's signs everywhere warning people, robots will shoot to kill. And that robot can tell that it should ignore the squirrels and ignore the bushes, but if it sees a human, kill. Would you agree that it's having a preference? And let me just tell you, if you agree that it does, they already exist. They're being used in parts of the world now.
Well, I mean, there is a problem with that. I mean, in your scenario, the robot is pre-programmed. No, the robot is pre-programmed to prefer human targets over squirrels.
I've got one for you.
Yes, but the point is, we are pre-programmed in our own ways.
I've got
but
one.
What I'm talking about is an AI that can add to its own programming over time.
I've actually got one for you. Based upon what Dean says, you know, it's programmed to not shoot at the squirrels, not shoot at the bushes. It's programmed to shoot at humans. It realizes that a small child is not a threat and shouldn't be shot at, and doesn't shoot at the small child. That is when I would say it's an AI.
Theoretically, I don't see why it can't do that now.
Well, it can do that now. All you have to do is specify like a height range. If you say that it has to be between
what I'm saying is
4'5" and 7 feet.
All right, you guys
specified in it, and then it learns it itself.
Okay,
yes, but then there's still a problem. What happens if it's a midget with a machine gun?
See, there you go. Listen, when people, let me just make this point. When people are dismissive of AI questions, just realize there really are people who like spend all day running math equations and algorithms trying to crack these issues. As philosophical as it is, it should be interesting to you that there's a lot of money and research going into this stuff, and interesting things keep happening. You know, seriously, have you talked to a robot on the phone yet? Because that would have been that would have been computationally impossible. I don't mean very difficult. I mean computationally impossible 20 years ago. Now we do it and don't think about it.
And in the next 30 years, we might actually see quantum computing finally make the breakthroughs it needs to be commercially successful.
Pause it for a second, because Rachel's been trying to get in.
Hey, wait a minute. Wait a minute. You were just talking, Catrice and James. James, I didn't hear what you said.
30 years from now, we might see quantum computing become commercially successful. If that's the case, then that computational power is going to be extraordinarily vast.
Yeah, and that's the thing. There's going to be some point where it's... And then what's going to happen? What happens if... well, we're already wiring people's ears up with cochlear implants. But what happens when, really, I can fix some problem you have with an implant in your head, or just give you some enhanced ability with an implant in your head? We're already experimenting with that shit. So it's going to... I mean, the next 20 years are going to be wild. They really are.
Yeah.
Cybermen are coming!
Oh, gosh. No, but what I was going to bring up is this. In terms of preference, or at least what I was going to mention was that, and this is just an example, when they've interacted with something even as an intelligent creature like an octopus or a squid, they will have situations where it's very difficult to keep them contained. But not just that, they will remember and recognize different people. And not only that, but they will dislike people for like just the littlest things. And that's the kind of preference that I think we need. It is, they don't necessarily have to have a reason that makes sense that we can measure, but just a preference, maybe even off of like, I don't like the way you look, or I don't like
your bell bottoms.
I don't like the way you specifically talk, or the way you held that pencil, stuff like that. It's a part of what makes us human. It's not the nicest thing, but that's the thing. If you're gonna get to human level intelligence, it's a mess.
Well, we're a cloud of conflicting impulses and internal tests we do. You know.
Sorry.
No, that's what I mean. I'm just observing. That's how I see the human mind now. In fact, it's a big cloud of conflicting impulses trying to resolve and doing it constantly.
I think that big cloud of conflicting impulses tends to drive us insane.
Well, yes, but that's also the key. I think the most important part that we need for AI is it has to be able to correlate information that is not directly compatible to each other. So, for example, like, the main part of what makes our brain intelligent really is our capacity to look at something, draw upon like a memory, and compare the two. We look at a cloud, we see an elephant in the sky. We know there's not an elephant out there, but we're able to combine the two despite that they're not really all that similar. And I think that's really what's going to be the largest breakthrough, is when you can start, when you're not just comparing, well, this is an animal because of this shape, but it's like, this is an animal because it covers various particular aspects to it. Like, if you have a computer that looks at like a video of like the Canada space arm on like the shuttle that's discontinued now, and it says, oh, that's an elephant's trunk, that might very well count as artificial intelligence.
I'm going to leave you with that. I'm going to call that the last thought, because we really are at the 2-hour mark, and while we started a little late, I think it's time we start wrapping up.
Oh, you mean we can't talk about the psycho in the red suit?
Oh, the psycho in the red suit? Oh,
Deadpool,
fuck.
Foxes, like, we need to discuss Deadpool.
Okay, go.
We absolutely need to discuss Deadpool.
Right.
Especially with the T-shirt I have coming, which is Deadpool meets Gurr from Invader Zim.
Ooh. Now, earlier on, when you were reading out the stories, Dean, you actually posed a question, something to the effect of, what's going on, where Fox are already planning a sequel to a film that's not even out yet. And I think what it is, I think they actually recognize that Deadpool is such, like, the response to the Deadpool movie, the response to the trailer that they released is so massive and so positive that they believe it, like, Deadpool as a movie series is going to be a successful movie series. But it just is.
The problem with that is let's look at, say, Blade. The first one was actually a really great movie, but they just bombed from there on out. If you want an actually successful movie franchise, you actually have to put some thought into the stories.
I want to give an alternative hypothesis to that, which is why, I mean, if you do a sophisticated analysis, you know the movie industry is in a major shifting evolution right now. Actually, it pretty much is in perpetual revolution. You look at the history of box office films, it's been a constant evolution. And how do you make money at this, right? I mean, in the olden days, it was because basically you had an evening's entertainment. You'd go to the movies and you'd see 4, 5, 6 things, right? And that had to evolve and all that. Now the competition is so fierce, right? Why do you want to go to the box office at all? And that's a standing question, right? And so if they're doing a really sophisticated analysis, they might have started to experiment with, all right, we have certain targeted audiences, and Geeks is a good place to start as any, but there'll be others, right? Like, why make all the Twilight films? There's a built-in audience, that's why. So even if the first one bombs, if we keep going, some fans will come. And what I can do is, if the fans are real unhappy, I'll just listen and I'll adjust to make them happier, which I think Gene Roddenberry started that with the first Star Trek movie, right? He did, because everybody hated the first Star Trek film, but all the fans showed up for it anyway, and then told them why they hated it while they went and bought a second and third ticket. That actually happened with the first Star Trek movie. I don't know if people know that, but it did. All the Trekkies hated it and went to see it anyway, and then gave the studios hell, and the studio said, oh, well, all right, scribble, 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 scribble. That's how they got Wrath of Khan.
That actually explains why Wrath of Khan was such a good movie in comparison.
That's the exact story. In fact, that's the one everybody points to as the best, pretty much. I mean, they'll have other favorites, but when it gets down to it, if Hollywood in general is going that way, it could, really, they might, we'll make Deadpool 1, we'll do the best we can. If we at least show the fans what we're trying, they'll show up for the next one. you've got to give people a reason to want to go to the theater in the first place, and those reasons are dwindling. You know, when I was a kid, it was like a night out for the family. Their dad was going to take us to the movies. Now it's like dragging my kid or my friends. You want to go to the movie? Well, I got nothing else to do. Let's plan. Nobody, right? The only thing that drives you to the theater, like most of us, is you're excited about a product you want to see.
Yeah, but
Well,
why is Deadpool a product that apparently a lot of people want to see? What makes Deadpool
That one I couldn't tell you because I've never
so
read
much
Deadpool.
better?
I've never read Deadpool.
Posit
Well, I mean-
that it's not any different. Like, if you look at something like, for example, they mentioned the Fantastic Four already had a second movie in production. Like, it's not that it's rare that they have a sequel in production. It's that they don't tell anybody that they're already halfway through shooting by the time the first movie's released. Like, these movies don't come out in 2 years. It usually takes, like, you're looking 3 to 5 years of production from initial writing of the script to the time that they actually release it. And yet these movies are usually staggered out like only 2 years apart. What's happening is that they've already decided to make, like, a bunch of movies for, or at least 2 movies for the Fantastic Four, and they had already shot it, or at least started filming, by the time that the first one was released. The first one bombed so freaking hard because it was crap, but the fact of the matter is, they thought it was going to do good. So what makes Deadpool different from the Fantastic Four?
That they would actually announce it
I'll give you
before the
another-
movie's even released?
And I'll give you a counterexample to that. Under the old school thinking, there would not have been another Hulk movie because that Ang Lee film was such trash. Instead, they just bulled on through and pretended the Ang Lee version of Hulk didn't happen and had a character that was accepted and a version that was accepted, and then they changed it in Avengers. So, like, if you're actually smart, it might be with a property like this. You anticipate the demand will be there, and you decide to correct rather than give up. I think Fantastic Four could have worked as a project if they just reworked it, because Fantastic Four is an awesome story.
Well, yeah, the Fantastic Four is an awesome story, but they screwed up because of
What if
a
they
lot of the
rewrote it?
social justice.
And what if they did it again, I'm saying? And
Well,
what if they looked at what sucked at the old one and just gave you another one? Fans would show up.
Keep in mind for Deadpool that they had him show up in a previous X-Men movie, and it was crap. And one of the first things they did, like before they even released the trailer for the Deadpool movie, they released a trailer for the trailer, because that's the kind of thing that Deadpool does. But the thing was, during the trailer for the trailer, he flat out said, and those idiots who thought that they should sew my mouth shut, and he called them out on it and said, we're not going to be doing like the dumb mistakes they did before.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a lot simpler than what Dean is trying to make it. I mean, Deadpool. Just look at who Deadpool is as a character. He's a merc with a mouth. He's constantly breaking the fourth wall. Even in the comics, he's constantly talking to the reader. Deadpool is a comic book character who is aware that he is a comic book character.
Well, that makes for an interesting question.
And not just that, he's not a hero, he is an anti-hero.
Well, it still makes for an interesting question. How do we know that we're not all comic book characters?
Because we do a hell of a lot more interesting, or we have really crappy writers.
And we would all look a lot sexier.
I don't know about you guys, but I'm thinking that my writer is like totally ADD or probably tripping balls on acid. I don't know. Just something, because seriously.
All right, guys. Well,
Rachel, you be tripping balls.
No,
tripping balls. Okay.
no. Actually, I'm drug free. That's the way to be.
Oh, there. So why don't we?
No, I'm talking
remember that,
Pokeballs.
kids. Remember that, kids. Drug free is the way to be. Rachel says drug free is the
No,
way
I'm
to
not
be.
talking that kind of balls. I'm talking she's tripping Pokeballs.
Oh, cool.
So why don't we call it? We've hit every story. Let's call it, guys. Who wants a final word? Jim?
All I've got is, you got to stop dealing with this PC bullshit and tell these fuckers to go fuck themselves. Is about the only thing I got for it. Oh, and buy Dean's book.
Oh, well, gee, thanks. I'm glad you noticed after 3 years or whatever. Yep.
Wow.
Yes, Methuselah's Daughter, on sale now.
Speaking of which, I'm going to buy the paperback, and I'm sending it to you to sign for me, Dean.
Oh, well, that's fine. No problem. Anytime. Rachel, final thoughts?
Oh, gosh. Never let the PC folks back you into a corner. And, everything in moderation.
Cat.
Including Rachel's ass.
Oh god, I'm so oppressed. Support my Patreon.
Oh, you're very oppressed. Support your Patreon. Okay. Excellent. Excellent.
Do you want to shill your Patreon real quick?
Just throw it in the loop.
Catrice is trans, so she's double oppressed. Just be in here. Just be in here.
Yeah, with all those white shitlords right here.
I wasn't gonna bring that up.
Oh, I'm sorry. Was that rude? I'm sorry.
No, I don't care. I'm just saying, I'm only shilling. I'm not, trying to really, play a professional Olympics.
You have nothing to be afraid of. Or ashamed of, my friends. Nephenor!
I have 3 things. First off, are you PC, bro? Second off,
yeah!
PC. No. PC Master Race? Does this give a whole new term to it? And finally, remember, if you are not PC, and if you do not like feminism, devilscontract.com for all your comic entertainment.
Alrighty then,
Wait,
Mr.
PC
Huff.
Master Racism?
PC Master
Yeah,
Race.
that makes sense.
I've got nothing else to add.
Huff's got nothing else. Christian.
The only thing I'm going to do is shill. I am DMing a D&D game with D, Nephenor, and Rachel from TFI, and we're going to be playing with a few guys from Red Pill Gamers. The game starts tomorrow. It will be 3-hour sessions every Sunday, starting at 7 p.m., and that's my end of my shill.
Excellent. All
Come
right.
watch us play D&D.
That's got to be. I can't wait to see. Oh my God! I can't wait to even think about who's going to be
it's his
assigned
first
to
time
listen.
DMing. We're popping his DM cherry.
But more to the point, there's all these trolls who follow around prominent feminists and MRAs, and some of them are going to feel compelled to listen to this. And
let the power of MRA compel you.
Yeah, you know what? I promise you, even they will have fun watching this game.
I hope so. All right, later, taters, everybody. See you next week. Home.
Take the